As episodes of xenophobic attacks continue to cause disruption in certain areas of South Africa, some schools and foreign-owned shops remain closed due to the ongoing violence, but there are concerns that the continuous violence has had a negative impact on South African businesses operating elsewhere in Africa. Now, reports suggest that petrochemical giant Sasol was directly affected as it was forced to stop work in Mozambique. Earlier this year, we are joined by University of Johannesburg Chairperson of African Diplomacy and Foreign Policy, Professor Chris Landsberg, who predicted that it was only a matter of time before we had repeats of the xenophobic attacks that happened in 2008. He's here in studio with us today to tell us more. He's also joined today by, of course, the president of SACCI, the South Africa Commerce and Industry, President Vusi, talking about the impact on business, and we're going to unpack it with our two gentlemen. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me here on Newsroom. Professor, maybe let's start this conversation with you, because it was only in January that you predicted this conversation, that we were going to have this conversation around xenophobia, and that it was going to escalate. What were the indicators back then that made you make those statements?
Look, first of all, many people use 2008 as the supposed turning point. Sad to say that this thing has been with us almost for as long as we've been a democracy. We're coming of age this year. I think the dramatic point I was making on the 26th of January, I remember very vividly, with your colleague Eben Jansen, was that it's only a matter of time before Africans will turn on South Africans in the rest of the continent. So just to repeat to you, this thing for the first time reared its head in 1998, 2002, 2008, and of course now the sad events of now. In short, we are a traumatized state, we are a violent society, and that dramatic picture on Sunday where these angry people pounced on this Mozambican, I'm sad to say to you that this is happening every weekend in the townships and in our communities.
Professor, before I bring Vusi into this conversation, I want to play that clip. I just want the viewers, for those that didn't watch that interview you had with Eben Jansen, this is exactly what you said. Let's take a look at this.
Friends of mine, they say they come from poorer African countries, but their societies are much more tranquil. I love Tanzania and I love going to Tanzania. I can tell you Tanzania doesn't experience the kind of social ills and violence that yet it's a much poorer country. Now, you know what they say? Not only is there a need for collective responsibility, but this entire society of ours needs to go for psychiatric treatment. We haven't dealt with our problems of the past. That's why there's this resort to violence. Let me just throw in another spin in the works here. Here is a country claiming to be a leader in Africa, or at least having some leadership aspirations in Africa. If you can't point to a constituency in Africa to support your African aspirations, in fact, you are targeting people from other African countries. I want to make a dire prediction for you and say to you, it's only a matter of time that we might see a backlash against South Africans in other African countries for the way we treat their people in our own society.
Okay, so that's a conversation we had with Professor Chris Landsberg, who joins us here today. Mr. Kamala, let me bring you into this conversation, and I think we're talking about stability. In 2008, we saw the wave of xenophobic attacks. We're now in 2015. Just draw a comparison for me very quickly in what business we're going through then and what business is going through now. Because I think Professor was quite critical when he talked about stability being the key to good business.
Thank you very much, and good morning to the listeners. Looking at 2008 to date, there's been a bit of a lull in the re-emergence of the xenophobic attacks. From a country's perspective, we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And obviously the world is looking at South Africa as one of the countries in Africa, a preferred destination to do business with. The policies, the infrastructure, the whole business environment has got to be conducive to attract foreign direct investment that will lead us to growth in our economy. Obviously, what has happened is bad for publicity for a country that is in dire need for economic growth. However, this is not unique. I just want to mention this without a pinch of salt. If you look at what happened after Ghana received its independence, the economy was booming. All other neighboring African states flocked to Ghana. The same thing happened in Nigeria when the oil industry was doing very well. There was quite a large contingency of fellow African countries flocking into Nigeria. But because of the economic impact and the number of people that were in those respective countries, there was a backlash. Unfortunately, ours is violent. In their case, the locals in those respective countries, they felt threatened by foreign nationals coming to their countries to take their jobs. The point that I'm trying to highlight here, whilst the situation is not unique to South Africa, it's a human element and it's an economic factor. Obviously, the manner in which it is happening in our country, there is violence, there's denigration, there's dehumanization. That is totally unacceptable, and business is totally against that.
Let me ask Vusi a couple of questions. I mean, this is important. And Vus, this is not putting you on the spot. This is us trying to deal with a very serious phenomenon in our society. I'm going to be very honest with you. Yes. I'm waiting for corporate South Africa en masse to take a stand against this thing.
Yes. And we haven't really seen
we haven't seen them even condemning it, let alone taking actions. Now I'm asking the question, what should it take? Now, this is not a beauty contest between somebody who in January predicted the backlash. I just happen to you know, as my title suggests, I happen to work with the continent. And I really think we overrate ourselves. And if you think this is just a question I'm asking about corporate sector, I saw some analysts on radio and television yesterday who are so outraged by this, saying to government, lock them up, smoke them out. These very analysts, on paper, it's written, it's out there, all our views are out there. You know, so if you've written something, you can't distance yourself from it. It's the same analyst who said 10 years ago, 15 years ago, South Africa is, quote unquote, the hegemon of Africa, the lead nation of Africa. We can impose our will on Africa. There's almost a superiority complex with which we suffer from. And what I've consistently argued is that, including on that program on the 26th, is that it's not democracy that's under threat, not even what's happening in Parliament, serious though it is. There is a social crisis in this country that is about to explode. And we've just seen the signs against foreigners now, but it's happening weekend in, weekend out.
And let me just touch on that very quickly, because I do think what the professor is talking about, how do we address this issue? Because we've heard so many South Africans, and yes, xenophobia needs to stop. And I think in the wake of that question, corporate South Africa seems to be very quiet, and we've seen everywhere, Facebook, Twitter, ordinary South Africans, presidents talking about our very own president on more than one occasion has addressed the nation, has done interviews around xenophobia, but we haven't seen the leaders of the big multinationals coming forward and saying, guys, this is actually wrong. Encouraging business to do ethical business so that we don't, because right or wrong, we're hearing South Africans saying that, well, they're hiring foreigners and paying them less money and we are not getting jobs. But what I'm saying is we haven't really seen corporate South Africa come out the way we've seen politicians, our ministers, ordinary people in the street galvanizing around this issue. Why haven't we?
I think that's quite a fair comment. But I can say for a fact that there are quite a number of initiatives that are currently at play. The initiatives like looking at collaborative, working together in terms of getting to the root of the challenges the country is faced with. Just recently, the Durban Chamber of Commerce and Industry had an esteemed guest, a daughter to the Pick and Pay boss, who not only pledged X amount of money, but called for other corporates to contribute. At the SACCI level, there is a strong drive to canvass our members to actually not only talk, but to actually get into real things that they need to do in order to cap this scenario. Apart from being the broader spectrum of the South African society, the voice that is collective includes the corporate. Maybe what you are indicating is that there is no one single corporate that is coming out vociferously and strongly. But the voice of business through SACCI, we are doing so. We've been constantly up and indicating what the challenges the country is faced with, and we still continue to do so.
Professor, let me bring you into this conversation, because we are seeing at an informal level, we're seeing businesses closing down. We're seeing people that in one way or another they're driving economies. We can argue it which if it's South Africans or Africans, but there is an economy that's being driven forward by these small informal businesses. They've now closed down. People are moving out. They're now staying in refugee camps. These are businessmen that are now no longer selling those loaves of bread, no longer employing locals on the ground. How do we get them to come back? Because we're South Africa, we're part of Africa, we don't want Africans to go anywhere. But how do we now say to them confidently, come back, you're safe?
There's a sense of anger, certainly by the President and the government, about this Sunday Times headline story of the weekend. And by some of us, there was a sense, Vusi, of outrage. There was a chill that we felt about it. I tell you what's interesting about that picture. That picture did more to focus the mind, because I think there's a galvanizing sort of set of events now happening against it because of that picture. What I would say to that journalists and the media in general, I think the President is unfair to almost go to the extent of blaming the media. The President also had a lot to say about a constituency where I supposedly belong to, the analysts, these smart people and so on. But there is a sense now in some communities. I happen to come from Regepa, that borders Ramaphosa. The same Ramaphosa where that Mozambican victim was so brutally burned to death in 2008. That Mozambique, that Ramaphosa is now calling back the business. So I think rationality will set in, people will claim. But at the end of the day, there's a fundamental responsibility on us as South Africans, government, civil society, corporate South Africa, to take a very hard look at ourselves and not be too worried about our image abroad and get things correct at home. I'm still suggesting to you, yes, we are outraged because it was a Mozambican, but we do these things against each other every weekend. Government's 2008 report, and I'm going to make a very controversial statement about this. The Social Cohesion Report of 2008, Vusi. Brilliant report. I mean, there's no university professor that I've seen wrote a report like Jonah Tsetenza and his colleagues did. They said most homicides in South Africa happen on a Friday evening between 10 o'clock and a Sunday morning, 6 o'clock, Sunday morning, so that weekend. And it happens typically around liquor outlets. But guess what? Because it's associated with a short man, with President Mbeki, we distance ourselves from it. So this Polokwanization of everything we must now get over it in this country. Everything is being Polokwanized, slates, factions, and so on. This nation needs certainly a national dialogue. But let me leave you with this provocative thought, though. I think, in a sense, we went through 1994, the transition, too easily, and we neglected to address fundamental scourges and problems and scars in the society, not in the least the devastating social ills that apartheid left us with. That's South Africa's Achilles heel. Again, it's not formal democracy. We will have elections on time next year. The ANC may even lose a metro or two. They might come to accept the result. It's the social violence that's playing itself out in this country.
And let me maybe bring Buz in here, and because you asked, we need to take a hard look in corporate South Africa. We know that there are expansive CSI budgets. There are budgets within corporate South Africa that, if you look at some of them, are close to billions. Why is that money not being used to address some of the issues that the professor is talking about? Because collectively, if you've got 6, 7 multinationals pooling their CSI and developing talking, engaging, creating programs that address those issues, it not only talks about the legacy of potential legacy of the country, but also we're investing in the youth tomorrow, because surely they must be the corporate leaders of tomorrow.
I think what is coming out is such that the big business is not blowing its own trumpet in terms of what it is doing.
I agree.
That's a certain perspective. But if you look at the amount of work that is done through also the very social corporate investment programs, it's massive. There is evidence of how those effects have in terms of building up our country. But I will go on to say, we're at a stage in this country where we need each other. We're at a stage there in our country where collectivism should be the order of the day. I think at this point in time, there are a number of references that we can make what is good, what is not good, that has happened through big business. But we're at a stage, and that will be SACCI's advocacy to ensure that we work together. So we get to the root of the problems.
We've run out of time. We've got a couple of comments that relates to xenophobia in business, and where relevant, I'll just ask for you to just share your thoughts on them very, very quickly. Sure. Okay, let's take a quick look at those comments. Remember, you can send them to SABC Newsroom. Let's look at our screen, and of course, these are some images behind me on the bright eye. If we look at, here comes from Sure, it says, probably it's the first time since 21 years ago xenophobia in South Africa is threatening SA's business, political, commercial interests in sub-Saharan Africa. I think Sure maybe might be forgetting the attacks of 2008. Football, business, entertainment, and at my ANC on the fight against xenophobia. We all have a part to play. Professor, very quickly, you touched on this quickly. That part to play, very, very quickly. How do we start playing our part?
No, I mean, the very least we can do is, as Vusi said, have serious dialogues with ourselves and with fellow Africans. But more than that, we have to embrace Africans. Let me just briefly, literally in 10 seconds, say this to you. I would advise government, modestly, that the countries with the most progressive immigration laws happen to be the ones with the tightest immigration controls. So if you can't control your borders, there's a spillover. And you know, as for African governments, yes, it's okay for President Mugabe to now send buses to repatriate its people. But there's been a sense of forced migration. And the challenge for African states, why are their citizens leaving their own countries in the first place, right? Or what are their responsibilities to create conditions? So there's a responsibility on us as South Africans to become more humane, but African states must also ask a question.
Next one comes from Dr. Musa. It says, South Africa is one of the best countries on the black continent with business opportunities and hospitality. Xenophobia has killed everything, I assume Dr. Musa is saying. This is a bit pessimistic, Mr. Khumalo. I mean, look, we are having this dialogue. We've seen the hashtags, we've seen the marches, we've seen the president, we've seen, as you said, on the ground, business is doing stuff. We need to be careful that we don't become too pessimistic about our current problem and we don't talk about the solutions. Quick comment from you.
At this point in time, we really don't need pessimism. We are on the vanguard. We need to be taking stand actions. We need to be working together. It's important for this country, for the continent, to ensure that we strengthen the policies. As Prof has alluded to, we need to ensure that we activate the systems that are already in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again.
So we're going to leave it there. This is our last tweet. It comes from the Visionary. It says, xenophobia is inhumane and extremely bad for business. And I'm sure my panel of experts will agree. That, of course, is Professor Chris Landsberg, who is the Chairperson of African Diplomacy and Foreign Policy at the University of Johannesburg. And I'm joined by the SACCI President, Vusi Khumalo, sharing their thoughts on an interesting topic. I do think we need to keep on engaging on this.